Hi, so this is Candice again with another OIA radio show, and today we're here with Ella Henderson, who works with Project Wisdom. Welcome to our show, Ella.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Okay, so please tell us about yourself and how you came to work with Project Wisdom.
Okay, well, I'm actually a U of G grad. I came to Guelph to do a master's program in public issues anthropology. My research in that program was with seniors and about their experiences moving into retirement residences. And through some volunteer work I was doing at the time, I heard about the position to coordinate Project Wisdom. I applied for it. I was able to bring my sort of anthropology lens, looking at culture, my experience working with seniors, to this job, coordinating Project Wisdom with Immigrant Services and Trellis. That's how I got here.
Okay, that's quite interesting background that you have. And maybe you can tell us at this time, what is Project Wisdom?
Sure. Project Wisdom is actually a partnership project. It's a partnership between Immigrant Services Guelph-Wellington and Trellis, Mental Health and Developmental Services. It's funded by the Government of Canada under a pot of money called New Horizons for Seniors, which funds all kinds of projects to do with seniors' quality of life and well-being, and particularly elder abuse projects. So Project Wisdom was designed to raise awareness about cultural issues in elder abuse awareness, prevention, and intervention. And so we began in May of last year, so 2010. And it was an 18-month project, and we'll be wrapping up at the end of September 2011. And some things that we've done through the project, as I said, it was an elder abuse awareness raising project. And what we chose to do is to have two sort of streams, one stream focused on community awareness and one stream focused on raising the awareness of service providers around issues that they should think about when they're working with linguistically and culturally diverse seniors who may be facing abuse. So back in November 2010, we did focus groups in Arabic, Punjabi, and Uzbeki in town in Guelph here, talking to seniors and family members who were living with or caring for seniors about what were their understandings of elder abuse, what were their experiences accessing senior services. And we took that and we took some learning from that about what the awareness of elder abuse was, what the understanding of elder abuse was, and then what the community was saying that they would like to see in terms of improved services or information or things like that. Out of those focus groups, we learned also sort of something about what service providers needed to know about the community and the community's experiences with the services and their knowledge of the services. So from those focus groups and from other research that I've done, we decided to design a community resource booklet, which is basically a directory of senior services, but it's being translated into 7 different languages. So there are lots of ways that you can get information about senior services in Guelph, but for some reason, people who don't speak English and particularly immigrant and ethnocultural seniors are sort of falling through the cracks and not getting connected to those things. So the Project Wisdom Advisory Committee decided that we should create a resource booklet that would be translated and then distributed in the community so that people who face language barriers in particular would have better access to that information and therefore be better able to connect to the services. You can't connect to something if you don't know that it exists, right? So we did that. We're working on that right now, working on translating that resource right now, which has been a great learning process. I don't know if you've ever tried to translate something into 7 languages, but it takes a long time. So lots of good learning there. And then that was a community piece. That's our service to the community. And then we also designed workshops for people who work in senior services, people who manage like CCAC caseworkers, hospital workers, nurses, social workers, people from community living, people from settlement organizations. So we were able to capture quite a broad range of service providers in the workshops that we provided. And those workshops, there were 2 of them. Or a series of 2 workshops that we offered. It will be 5 times when we're done. And one workshop deals with issues of culture and immigration and how those can relate to an elder abuse situation that service providers should be aware of. And the other one deals with how to work more effectively with interpreters, how to access interpreter services and translation services, and then how that dynamic should work. What are the professional expectations of interpreters, and how to communicate more effectively using an interpreter. So those are the workshops we provided. So Project Wisdom has been a bit of a whirlwind, 18 months developing, focus groups, community resource, workshops for service providers, and now we're working on wrapping things up, and should be wrapped up by the end of September.
So in one of the workshops, you examined culture and immigration as factors in elder abuse. And maybe you can tell us what you've learned so far about that.
Sure. I'm actually in the middle of just writing that up as a sort of follow-up written toolkit, follow-up to the workshops. It's a complex issue. So if we take, we'll start with immigration because that's kind of a bit more straightforward. And I do want to say that often when we start talking about cultural difference, the conversation kind of slides into talking about immigration. But when we're talking about cultural difference, we're not necessarily talking about immigration, right? People who are longstanding multi-generation Canadians have cultural differences that we need to negotiate. So I want to be careful about that. When we're talking about immigration, one of the major sort of issues is how long has someone been in Canada and how familiar are they and how able are they to navigate the service system. Someone who's been here for many years and is confident in English and can read all the information and can access services with confidence, they're not dealing with the same risk factors as someone who immigrates late in life, either independently or who is sponsored by a family member. When we're talking about elder abuse, the conversation is usually around sponsored family class immigration, so seniors who come sponsored by their family members, immigrating late in life as seniors, and so those people can face a lot of challenges that put them at risk, make them vulnerable to abuse. Things like language barriers. They may not be confident functioning in English, may not be able to speak English when they arrive, and therefore may become dependent on their families for access to the community, access to services, to learn how to live in Canada, to learn about anything. And dependency is a major risk factor for abuse. If you really need someone else to provide something for you and they're too busy, or they have to do something else, or your relationship with them breaks down, that can be a really risky situation. Other things like cultural differences, when someone a senior who immigrates late in life, like anyone else, is going to experience some culture shock. Coming to Canada, things are different. Things aren't maybe done the way they are back home. Maybe their family is more acculturated than they are, and so there are cultural differences not only between the senior and their new host community, but between the senior and their adult children, or between the senior and their grandchildren. So that's a risk factor as well. Also, control over their financial resources or lack of financial resources is a risk factor for anyone, any senior who lacks sufficient financial resources to provide for themselves, or who doesn't have control of their financial resources, is at risk of abuse. In a sponsorship situation, what often happens is that a senior who is coming from wherever they're coming from will sell everything they have, liquidate all their assets, and give the money to their adult children who are sponsoring them. Then they arrive, let's say they're fighting with their children, they want to move out, they don't have their money anymore. So that's another risky situation. So there are a lot of different factors. And as I said, the basic one is not being familiar with your community, not having the social connections that you had back home, and not having the resources, the language, the cultural knowledge to build those social networks to be more independent. So they can become very isolated. Isolated not only from the community, that maybe they don't speak the language, maybe they don't know where to go, isolated from even the family that sponsored them because of those age differences, cultural differences, and tensions that can arise. The sponsorship situation can become very tense for everyone involved, especially if, say, the financial situation of the family changes. You do need to meet a minimum income requirement to sponsor a family member, but you sign an undertaking stating that you will provide for that family member for the duration of that undertaking. And if your financial situation changes, you continue to be responsible for providing for that person, and that can cause a lot of strain in the relationship. So the sponsorship thing can be a major risk factor. It doesn't have to be. I mean, lots of people are sponsored, they come, they have a full, rewarding life with their families, but when we're talking about elder abuse, we have to acknowledge that the sponsorship can be a major issue. Culturally, which is the other, I've sort of talked about it a bit in terms of the sponsorship situation, but culturally, people don't do elder care the way it's done in Canada and the rest of the world. People have different expectations about who's going to provide care, who you go to for care, what kind of care is acceptable from whom. And when you're in Canada and you're trying to deal with the service system, there can be sort of a cultural gap in terms of a service provider who can only offer the services they can offer because that's how the system is designed, and someone who needs help, needs service, but the way the system works doesn't work for them. One example that I heard of was I think it was a son and his wife had the son's mother living with them, and the mother needed a lot of personal care, bathing, dressing, toileting. And the service provider who was working on that case was trying to get someone into the house to help with that care. And for some reason, I don't remember why, they didn't qualify for that personal care service. And the response was, well, the son will just have to do the care. If the daughter-in-law can't do the care, the son will have to do the care. But culturally, it is totally inappropriate for the son to be doing that intimate personal care for his mother. And so there is an example of how that's not going to work, and how the service system needs to be aware that there needs to be some accommodation. So those are some of the issues that we tried to talk about in the workshop around culture and immigration as factors in elder abuse.
Il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard. Mes copains ont des voitures, il y en a d'autres à l'aventure. Mes copains ils sont partis, oh mais moi je suis là pour servir mon pays, et je suis là. Il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard. Mes copains ont des voitures, il y en a d'autres à l'aventure. Mes copains ont des villas, mes copains ils sont partis. Oh mais moi je suis là pour servir mon pays, oh je suis là petit à petit. L'oiseau fait son nid, petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid, petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid. Doni, 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 koloni panyoira. Oi! Jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard, il n'est jamais trop tard. Mes copains ont des voitures, mes copains ont des villas, mes copains ils sont partis, il y en a d'autres à l'aventure. Oh mais moi je suis là pour servir mon pays, toujours là, petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid. 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 Doni, 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 koloni panyoira. Doni, doni, koloni panyoira. Oh la 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 la, oh la la la, oh la la la, oh la la la. Di la, oh la, oh la, oh la, oh la, oh la la la.
I'm glad you brought out that point, that point that in a lot of other cultures, there are grandparents, there are parents who live with adult children, and it's not so really in mainstream Canada, and there are going to be many differences that we have to think about when we're dealing with culturally diverse seniors. So We also, in one of the workshops as well, I know that you discussed gaining strategies for working with non-English speaking clients through interpreters or translators. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. That workshop we provided in partnership with Translation and Interpretation Program Services, TIPS, which is through Immigrant Services. So actually, Mary Lou Emberg, who is coordinating TIPS, offered that workshop. So it's not my area of expertise. But what she dealt with in that workshop, and I actually went to the workshop so that I could learn what she had to teach as well. It was a fabulous workshop. We did lots of really hands-on practice with working with an interpreter. In terms of the strategies to access interpreters, that was a lot of education that she did about how the service system works in Guelph, and some history about how translation and interpretation services are sort of evolving and changing. In many cases, getting an interpreter, especially when you're dealing with a medical situation or a care situation, an emergency, you need an interpreter really fast. You need whoever's there right now, okay, let's go. And so one of the values of this workshop was trying to educate service providers about why using a family member really isn't appropriate, how to access services quickly, what are that professional accredited interpreters have developed, been trained, been tested on very finely honed skills to be able to do their job well. Whereas someone who happens to work in the same building, who happens to speak Spanish, doesn't have that. So part of the education of that workshop was, why do you need an accredited interpreter? How do you get one? And if you can't get one, here are some things that you should know about how interpretation works and really what you're asking of the person. It seems sort of straightforward to think, oh, well, you just repeat what the other person said, but in different language. But then you're dealing with expressions, idioms, different words. The subtle nuances in the meaning of words are different. If I could go back to elder abuse for a second, as a good example of that, elder abuse is a term that many English speakers aren't familiar with. And it's really a term that's kind of developed in English. And so if you're trying to talk to someone in another language about elder abuse, A, that term may not exist, so you have to develop a whole sentence or two to describe what it is. And B, research, international research that has compared different countries, different cultures, shows that people associate the word abuse with different things. Which is not to say that hitting someone isn't considered abuse in lots of different places, but it is it does mean that people are willing to use the word abuse in different cases. So one interesting finding was that the word abuse may be reserved for physical assault, hitting someone, whereas in the elder abuse literature, the service system here, abuse refers to financial abuse, using someone's money in a way that they haven't approved of or don't understand, emotional abuse, calling them names, neglect, sexual abuse, which includes just inappropriate sexual comments that make them feel uncomfortable so it's, if I go back to translation now, interpretation, someone who just happens to speak Spanish isn't going to be able to handle an interpretation situation as professionally as a professional interpreter, basically. So that workshop was excellent in terms of raising service provider awareness of the complexity of interpretation, the difference between translation and interpretation, the fact that if you need an interpreter, you need to say, I need an interpreter, which means you need someone to translate like the spoken word. If you call up and say, I need a translator for a meeting, that's going to be confusing because translation refers to translating written things. So in terms of the language that a service provider needs to use to make sure they get what they need was something else that was covered in that workshop. Yeah.
And I'm sure that they would appreciate all the work that you've done. And so we'd like to thank you very much today for joining us on another OIA radio show. And we really look forward to hearing the future of Project Wisdom, and we hope that, you are successful in getting the funding to continue, and that you would be able to continue in the project as well. So thanks, Ella, and take care.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the project, and good luck with your show.
من آمدم عشق فریاد کند من آمدم که ناز بنیاد کند من آمدم آمدم عشق فریاد کند من آمدم که ناز بنیاد کند من آمدم من آمدم عشق فریاد کند من آمدم که ناز بنیاد کند من آمدم